Hi, I am Kerry Brink. I'm your host for this African session, and I would like to welcome all of you to this very special 24-hour webinar. I have a great session in store for you with different speakers, and we have Peter Limbu, who will be our moderator. And Limbu is from TNC Tanzania, working on conservation initiatives in Lake Tanganyika, and he has also agreed to stand in for Emmanuel Mbaru, who was unfortunately not able to make it today. Thank you so much to all of our participants. We have 177, which is fantastic. Welcome. There's a few things that I would like to show you. Yeah, thank you, Ariane. Firstly, you are all on see and listen mode. So that means you can't use your mic or your video at all. If you have any questions, there's the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can type in the questions, and Rosa then will make sure that all your questions get answered. And after each of the presentations, she will choose one or two of the questions to ask the presenter. If you have any remarks, you can use the chat function, or if you have any questions, and Ivan Hoving will help with that. And yes, without any further ado, Ariane Berghauser, the director of the World Fish Migration Foundation, would like to welcome you.
Ariane, you're still on mute.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I've been talking all the time to Kerry. Sorry. So I've started a little poll with 3 questions because I would like to know who you guys are. So we know a little bit who we're talking to, because otherwise you're just talking to a screen, and it's nicer to have a bit of an idea. So there are 3 questions. One is about what do you specifically like? Is it really fish or rivers, or is the whole everything, all the above? What is your background? Are you more of a scientist? Are you a non-profit organization? Like that. And do you plan to more sessions for today? So after you've checked on, you've clicked one of the choices, then you can submit it. I will just wait for a short moment because there's still people coming in, and now I will end the polling because I think it's already clear what's our audience at the moment. I will share that with you now. People watching now, most of us are all interested in fish and rivers and nature, all of the above. And most of us, most of the people watching, I mean the largest group, let's put it like that, are scientists. And I think that I saw indeed that most of the people are planning more sessions today, which is really nice to hear. So thank you very much. I will continue. This is our team. We have, as World Fish Migration Foundation, a fairly small team, but a lot of people around us who are supporting us and where we cooperate with, which is really, really nice vibe. And what happened actually is that 1 month ago, in this new COVID situation, our usual World Fish Migration Day had to be extended to October. And then we thought, well, let's do it in a webinar. And then, as it more often goes in our organization, Herman came with this crazy idea to have a 24-hour webinar, moving along with the sun, with the different time zones. And well, we like that. I said to Pau, one of the team members, let's go do that. Yes, of course, very nice. And then we started, and then we realized, oh, this is actually quite a thing to organize in such a short time, which made us like, oh my God, what's happening last week? and now we're in there. So it's a little bit of an experiment. So far, so good. So bear with us. The World Fish Migration Foundation started actually a little bit like this as a good idea and just happened in 2014. And a group of people dared to start a World Fish Migration Day. Crazy idea, but it happened. And it was successful. 270 events in more than 50 countries. How cool is that for a first time? And then after that, there were new projects coming. For example, the Happy Fish, a symbol of projects good for migratory fish, was launched in 2016. And again, the World Fish Migration Day was organized. Even more events, more countries involved. The Dam Removal Europe project started. I will tell a little bit more about that. After that, we joined the Amber project, a really big European project, identifying all the different barriers in European rivers. Coming soon with the results. And in 2018, we did the third World Fish Migration Day with even more events in more than 60 countries. And we launched the second actually of the From Sea to Source guide. And still we come up with new initiatives. Now it's the Global Swimways that we want to start as well. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next 2 hours for this session too. And as mentioned in October 2020, this October 24, we will have the fourth World Fish Migration Day. I hope a lot of you will have events too. We will also launch a Living Planet Index. I also will mention that later on. And we hope that by 2030, maybe already earlier, we will, at least as foundation, celebrate 1 river opening per day. In these years, we have managed to get contact with many people, many countries all over the world who are actually interested in migratory fish and in the rivers and in nature and all of the above, as mentioned before. And we have like 10,000 contacts of people who are really willing to make a change. And I think that's really cool. That's also very necessary because, as mentioned, we have this Living Planet Index that we're working on. And that index shows how it's going with migratory fish worldwide. It's measuring different databases with a lot of fish. And that is looking pretty grim. And we're looking at a new version to release soon. And I can tell you already, that's really worse than what's pictured here. It's really going bad with migratory fish worldwide. And that's why we have to do something about it. And we thought, let's look at other initiatives which have worked, where we can learn from. And then we quickly came to the idea to follow up with the idea of flyways, to learn from the people who are protecting migratory birds. It started in the 1930s already, a long time ago. There were scientists in the United States who started mapping the routes of migratory birds. And then got data for that and then started cooperating, exchanging data, then looking, okay, what needs to be done to improve the situation. And so a whole new field of work started developing, which in the end, in 1971, resulted in the Ramsar Convention, protecting wetlands along the pathway that need to be protected for these birds. And now they have summits with countries being present there by making legal agreements about how to protect birds. So that's something that we want as well for fish. And one of the things we can learn from them as well is that they have a good academic base of information. They made good overviews of the migratory routes of the birds and made it into a global picture, which is shown here from the polar, from above, and the different distances. And it's really well worked out. And we think we need to start developing that for the global swimways as well. And we did that already a few years ago in a drawing. It's more rough, so to say, very nice. But of course, we need a bit more scientific approach as well. And we started working on that together with IUCN and UNEP and the Cambridge University. And meanwhile, with a lot of other partners too, that's fantastic, like in Groningen and WWF and Nature Conservancy, many, we cooperate to bring that a step further, and we got support from the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. What we try to do is work out further on this. This is a first version of the Global Swimways, which means that these are the migration routes which are most used by migratory fish worldwide, and where most of the threatened species are also seen. That is really not finished. We need to work on this a lot more. It's there, it's a good start, but we need a lot more cooperation from people with right data, adding it all together. And that we have seen that in practice, that shows the benefits of this working together. For example, we have here swimways of the European eel. As you might know, European eel is born far away from Europe in the Sargasso Sea, close to the Gulf of Mexico, then floats with the current towards Europe, and then spreads all over Europe, different countries, and then into rivers and really inland. And during that travel, that amazing species, I mean, how does it do it? Encounters a lot of threats. For example, in Spain, when you're not lucky as a young eel, you're caught in a fish net and you're eaten by one of the people from the humans. If you are lucky enough to become big inland at a river somewhere, and you want then to return to the Sargasso Sea, you risk to be chopped by pumping stations. And so there's a lot of threats worldwide. And I mean, also for the European eel. The nice thing is that the growing cooperation that already started some time ago means that now we have European legislation for this European eel. And there are all different kinds of synergies between different activities cooperating to make a better world for the eel. That is something which is really inspiring, and it's also a lot of fun. This is a picture of myself and a lot of colleagues, also Herman and others, who are working on migratory fish in the Netherlands. This was such a fun project. It started with us looking at the main dam in the Netherlands. It's the Afsluitdijk. It's a 32 kilometers long dam separating the sea from freshwater. Quite disastrous for a lot of species like eel and others, quite difficult to cross. So we said we need to make a 24 hours gap in that dam. Now, that's not really easy in the Netherlands. They don't like gaps in dams. So we made a whole new construction, whole idea. And because we were cooperating so well, we managed to start a project which we called Fish Migration River. And we're, it's actually being built at this moment, costing 50 million euro, including education. And it's really, very exciting to see how something from an idea with a group of people can spread out and making that into reality. And that's the same spirit we have with the Dam Removal Europe project, for example, where different organizations who are promoting and working on dam removals are cooperating and trying to speed each other up in that whole process. Now, and I was listening this morning. This is a screen picture that I made this morning from Mr. Ju from Korea, where big time they're having a whole dam removal program as well. Very inspiring. I listened to Julie Clausen, who is working on protecting Masir and having different ideas about involving local communities for that. I was listening to Martin Mellon Cooper, who was mentioning using upstream waters in solving droughts without making too much problems for migratory fish. Ian, this was also very special. Somebody really engaging the local tribes from New Zealand. We had Derek from India doing education with children. We had Lee Baumgartner talking about really integrated approaches that they have in Australia. A lot of good ideas which deserve to be shared. Now, and that's why we have this webinar, We really would like to cooperate together as a whole community in this world and make a better world for migratory fishes and in the end for people as well. So I'm looking forward for the rest for this session and for the African session. So over to you again, Carrie, I think.
I would like to give the floor over to Peter Limbu, who will moderate this session and introduce the speakers.
Okay.
Peter Limbu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the nice presentation from Ayan. And my name is Peter Limbu. As Kerry introduced me, I work for the Nature Conservancy and I'm based on the west part of Tanzania on Lake Tanganyika. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. O'Brien to talk a bit about our Africa status and trends on the river restoration and fish migration in Africa. Just as a brief introduction, Dr. O'Brien is a researcher at the University of Mpumalanga and will highlight to us the importance of African migratory fish species and what are the issues that these fish have to endure. So please welcome Dr. Gordon O'Brien. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Really wonderful to be a part of this, this great session today. So I have a presentation that I just want to open up quickly. Just make sure that everybody can see it, hopefully. Great, I assume everybody can see it and everybody can hear me?
Correct. Great,
thank you. So again, what a wonderful opportunity to get together and to celebrate the things that we care so much about. Migratory fish is something that is really touched so many people around the world, and so many people around the world are so dependent on these fishes, and so much so in Africa. And that's really what I'd like to highlight today, is the connections between these important fishes and the people in Africa. So the title of this presentation, this is somewhat of an introductory presentation for the rest of the session, is to look at some status and some trends and what's happening in Africa and some of the results of some initial work that we're looking at. So what I would really like to celebrate today and to bring your attention to is to how wonderful Africa is as a continent. I know that we have lots of challenges, and that's something that we share across the world, but something that we need to talk more about is these success stories that we have. And one thing that we have in Africa are these incredible landscapes, and as diverse as the landscapes are, so are our people and so are our fishes, and that's really what makes Africa so special. And just to give you some idea of context within the African continent, that many people know of some of our major river ecosystems, including the Nile River, the longest river in the world, the Congo River, the Niger River in West Africa, the Zambezi, the Limpopo system. So we have some of these iconic major river systems. And through development, something we always start with, you can see that as we African nations have had opportunity to develop, you can see how the development of dams has progressed with the development. So you can see in many parts of the continent, we have major issues with these dams that have been constructed that have caused these migratory barriers to many fishes. These dams, I can generalize and say that these dams were built prior to any real knowledge of the consequences that river connectivity disruptions would have on migratory fish. And these new yellow spots are now those new dams that are being proposed to be built primarily for hydropower across the region. Africa is one of the areas that are being targeted or focused for our opportunity to build lots of hydropower dams. And you can see now that there are many new river connectivity disruption projects being planned. And that's now something that we have to look at very seriously. So there's a lot of data available to us, and I'd just like to then look in relation to where these barriers have been built, what is the status of the river connectivity in Africa. And I must say though that although this mapping, this project on mapping free-flowing rivers across the world has been undertaken. I do think, and it is highlighted in the Nature publication, that they have one of the areas where they have the least amount of information, the highest uncertainty, is also in Africa. So that's something that we need to consider. So these maps give a bit of an overall view as to the free-flowing status of most of our rivers. And you can see that although we do face problems, we do have a lot of rivers that are intact. And on the left, you can see is the map for Africa of free-flowing river status. And you can see some of the larger river systems are highlighted and what their connectivity status is. We've also got information on what are the dominant pressures. And you can see South Africa, where I'm based, and Southern Africa, that's really where we've seen the majority of the pressures that are affecting these connected rivers. But we have wonderful opportunities in the central and eastern part of Africa in particular. And we also have some information now on what to address and to work on when we're looking at West Africa. So just to consider these three different maps, we've got an idea of, although we do have many rivers that are still free flowing, we do have major issues, especially in Southern Africa and some of our major systems such as the Nile. But I do think that it gives us an opportunity to focus our attention on some of these important ecosystems that do have a high diversity of migratory species. And even that, from a migratory species and their migratory requirements, that information, although we've got some information, we still need a lot more to really characterize what is the requirements of most of these species. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity here to readdress a lot of these barriers and then to improve that opportunity we have for most of our species. We're talking about fish, so I had to show you some of the wonderful characters that we deal with every day. And I didn't want to show you the large and hairy, so to speak, but the small guys, because the majority of our fishes are quite small, and most of them have got very complicated life histories, and many of them have got incredible life migratory requirements as a part of those life histories. And you can see that a lot of our Congolese, our species are Congolese, and dominated by cyprinids and cichlids and caracins and xeriforms for some of the scientists out there. But as we know what our species are, we're discovering already that many of them are should have got conservation status or being listed and having conservation status and are not, doing very well. And that's something we really need to look at. And one thing that we're discovering is that apart from managing flows and managing water quality, the fact that we're not addressing connectivity explicitly and we're incorporating it directly into our management plans, that's possibly something that's hindering our ability to achieve that sustainable balance between the use and protection of river ecosystems that we're so looking for. But if people think about Africa, they think about the tigerfish and the teeth that we have in Africa. And what we're trying to do is to take these charismatic species that are drawing stakeholders from around the world to Africa to help us with the challenges that we face, and try to address a lot of the issues we have, and to promote fishes and their migrations, their life histories, and the importance that they have to people in Africa as well. And apart from that, what we do in Southern Africa well, and I was delighted to see the work that was done on Masir earlier and other cyprinids, is that we have a large diversity of the labiobarbus, the yellowfish group we call them here, and we refer to them as our living gold. And that's something else that we're trying to promote, which is important migratory species. And something you'll see a little bit later as well, which is so important.
Dr. Briani, you still have only...
How much, sorry?
You still have 1 minute remaining, please.
Okay, great. I'll zip through some things quickly. It's just to show you, we've looked at issues and opportunities across the continent. And that's something that's really wonderful about what's going to be presented today, is the diversity of case studies across the continent, the beautiful landscapes, the ecosystems we have, the opportunities we have, how we're trying to tie all this work back into these global management projects, such as sustainability projects, for example. And then I'd just like to end here that this is really something that is drawing so many people together. And this is a collage of all the people, and not all of them, but a lot of the people have helped me. You can see my children are stuck in the middle. They get rained on regularly. And just to show you that there are many faces and many people all over the place who are working together to contribute towards fish migration in Africa. And we encourage more of you to come and work with us because we need help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Brien, for a fantastic presentation. And that marks the top of our 10 minutes. Now, may I please welcome questions, our Q&A.
Yes. Hi, hello. Fantastic presentation, Gordon. Thank you very much. Yes, one of the questions would be, under your experience, would you say that perhaps the main threat that fish populations are going through in Africa would be related to fragmentation problems? Or would you say that it is more related to pollution or to overfishing, for example? What do you think?
I actually think it depends on where you are. In some areas, we definitely have connectivity issues, but we see that with technology available to use different chemicals and different processes for different land use activities, for example, water chemistry and water quality issues is a major problem we're dealing with across the continent. And then as far as unsustainable utilization with, we promote and we support subsistence fisheries, and we often work closely with subsistence fisheries, but there is a commercial element that's starting to really take its toll. And, we're hearing now of other nations, other regions of the world, setting up activities, fisheries and harvesting activities in Africa throughout the continent to take fish abroad. And I think that where we differentiate between subsistence fisheries, which we promote and support and want to facilitate, and unsustainable commercial fisheries, that's becoming a problem in many of our catchments. And we're seeing collapses in fisheries throughout the continent.
Okay.
So a combination of fragmentation, multiple stresses, alien invasive species, we're dealing with a lot of alien invasive species, and then excessive commercial harvesting of fish.
Okay, we have plenty of questions coming up. Do you think, are there coordinated efforts to fill in the gaps in the data on location of fragmenting features in rivers, dams, weirs, and culverts in Africa?
I think this is a good opportunity to raise some of the resource issues that we're dealing with in the continent. That it's not just a funding resource, but it's human capacity. And I think that, where we used to large parts of the world where regulators, governments, large regional areas together try and manage barriers, fisheries, and there's policies coming out of those processes. A lot of what's been done in Africa is being done by people on the ground, where you've got interested and affected communities, interested and affected biologists and ecologists and conservationists. They are all trying to get involved and do a lot of this work. And I think that on the South Africa, I think we're quite fortunate because we have got a more formal opportunity to influence government and policy, even though implementation is a big issue. I think that in the rest of Africa, we're still struggling to even get that off the ground. So we don't have a lot of the data, and what data we have is fragmented based on people's interests across the continent. And I think that it would be really useful going forward to have a more coordinated approach to trying to get all the countries in Africa to buy in, to start working together. Even if countries that share basins, that even has to be looked at, where we're starting to work together to manage fisheries on a basin scale. That isn't being looked at in many parts of the continent.
I can see in the chat there's a big interest in that. For example, regarding the future planning, for example, do you think these problems are being considered sufficiently in planning for new hydropower developments? Is there anything we need to improve this balance in decision making?
No, that's a good one, and I think there are changes. This World Fish Migration Foundation activities is one of the leading developments, which is fantastic. But I do think that what's really interesting is a lot of the funding that comes from World Bank, for example, puts a lot of regulations onto the developments. So we are seeing new considerations. Also on regional scales, people are starting to talk about downstream impacts and upstream connectivity impacts. So I think it's coming.
In fact, there's another question related to that. Any possibility of grants from the EU or African Union for doing research projects in fish migration field in Africa? Yes, as then.
I think
we still have only a few seconds. Dr. O'Brien, just a few seconds on that one.
Okay, just to finish that last question. We are very fortunate to get a lot of support from abroad, and we do collaborate with the EU and many developed nations. But I think that we need to generate a lot of more resources from the benefits of developing resources within the continent. And I think that that's not being considered. So although we do have some opportunities, it needs to grow, because I think that if we compare where Africa is to the rest of the world, we have a lot of catching up to do. And I hope that some of these presentations will shed some more light on that. So thank you for the opportunity, everybody.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Before finishing, just let you know that there are plenty of questions in the chat. Perhaps you have the chance of answering them personally. Thank you very much.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Hello, hello everyone. This is Limba again. I'm going to share with you a brief presentation about our Lake Tanganyika work.
Hi, Limbu, could you share your video so we can see you?
Yes, please. Just one moment. Here we are. Do you all see me?
Yes.
Oh, right. Unfortunately, I can't see my screen. I can't see my screen here. All right, so I want to share briefly. I want to share briefly. Do you see my screen there?
No. Can you share your screen?
Right. Just one moment. Do you see my screen there?
Yes. If you can just put it on the full sharing mode, so we can see it the full screen, because now we see it in the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So it should be on the full screen. Just one moment. Sorry, technology.
There's at the bottom right, there's a little icon.
At the bottom?
Bottom right, you'll see there's a book, and next to the book, not there, go up. You'll see where it says click to. If you go just underneath click, the word click on your presentation. Bottom right.
Is it there? Do you see my screen there?
Yeah, we see your screen.
Okay.
Yeah, there. Yes, there. Yes, that one. Where you were at just now.
Okay, good. Thank you. So as I earlier mentioned myself, I'm Peter Limbu. I'm the Fisheries Technical Advisor for the Nature Conservancy based here in Tanzania, on the west part of Tanzania on Lake Tanganyika, serving for the Africa program. I'm here to share with you the role of population health and environment, so-called PHE, in freshwater conservation, the case of the Nature Conservancy approach on Lake Tanganyika conservation. Let me start by saying the Nature Conservancy works in about 70 different countries in Africa, in the world, all serving conservation of land and water on which all life depend. In Africa, the Nature Conservancy works in 7 countries. Apart from the fact that it works in 7 countries, but the Nature Conservancy also serves more than 11 countries which are within the Africa Great Lakes. And for the purpose of this discussion, I'll just concentrate with Lake Tanganyika, where most of the efforts have been put for the purpose of the presentation. And on Lake Tanganyika, there are several migratory fish species, including the tiger fish that are on the mouth of the rivers. Lake Tanganyika itself is being fed by several rivers. And therefore, our approach on conservation does not only work with the fisheries, only with the rivers. We work holistically on the resources that are contributing in any way to the conservation of the rivers, the lakes, and the people on the lake. So on Lake Tanganyika, major migratory fish species that are highlighted, you mentioned them, the Lake Tanganyika sardines, as well as the lettuce, the perch. These are the key engine of this lake, and therefore the purpose of bringing only these 2 is because they are the engine of the economy of the Lake Tanganyika. So it is estimated that about 12 million people on Lake Tanganyika are benefiting from these resources, and they are employing more than 200,000 fishers. These fish species, plus other species on the lake, contributed to 60% of the total protein, animal protein that is eaten with the local community. So on your left, you can see these are the Lake Tanganyika sardines, Stolothrisa tanganikae, and on your right is the Lake Tanganyika lettuce stapersei, the commonly known as mgebuka. These are key, and therefore there have been several efforts employed by the Nature Conservancy and in collaboration with other organizations and governments to identify mechanisms of conserving them. But the Nature Conservancy is working on a place on Lake Tanganyika, mainly called the Greater Mahale ecosystem. This is one of the global biodiversity hotspots, and it is believed to have more than 250 fish species that are only found on Lake Tanganyika. And this place is also having about 93% of the 2,800 chimpanzee in the country. However, there are threats, and this is where the Nature Conservancy have been working with. All these threats are threatening the migratory fish species, including other non-migratory fish species on the lake and then the rivers that are flowing into Lake Tanganyika. So most of the threats are the unsustainable fishing practice, which leads to declining catch, unsustainable agriculture that leads to a lot of sedimentation in the lake, climate change, rapid population increase. It is believed that this part of the lake is almost perhaps the highest with the population growth, but the population is very young. About 49% to 50% of all the population are young at the age of 15 and below, but poverty is very high on this area. The approach that the Nature Conservancy is employing is what they call population health and environment, where you holistically address issues that are connecting people, their healthy and their nature or their environment, which means rivers are surrounded by forests, are surrounded by agricultural activities. All these are part of the management, which leads to conservation. This program, the Nature Conservancy has a program on Lake Tanganyika called the Tuungane program on the Tanzanian side, which reaches about 160,000 people, and it is close to Mahale Mountains National Park. The practice that are learned from there are replicated to other parts of the the region. But over 500 fishers have been trained. Local institutions in 23 villages have been established, have been supported to establish local scouting community, and the fish breeding sites where the community have allocated their fish reserves have been approved, which is equivalent to almost 10,000 acres of water, and the local people are protecting them. But of those, 10 sites have been protected by demarcation using plastic buoys, using TNC funds, and more than 1,000 fish electronic catch assessment survey data have been collected per year through TNC fund to the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries in Tanzania, and now it is flowing to Lake Tanganyika and Lake Victoria, being adopted by the riparian countries that are there. But also on Lake Tanganyika, the Nature Conservancy has established what they call Lake Tanganyika Atlas, which is it is a GIS tool which allows more than 300 layers of information that are pertaining to fisheries conservation, and this is offline and can be shared. And actually, it was shared to riparian state government officials for good management. But collaborative efforts in Africa and lessons from the Nature Conservancy includes strong beach management units, networks that are working very well. Community reserves called fish breeding sites, which allocates more than 10,000 currently, 10,000 acres currently, which is creating resiliency and the nursery grounds for the fish on Lake Tanganyika. But demarcated fish breeding sites with plastic buoys reduce friction because community already know that these are reserves where our fish do breed, so they are respecting it. And another lesson is the electronic data collection, which is now being supported and practiced in most of the Africa Great Lakes. This improves fisheries management, and actually it has now been scaled to part of the some of the countries on Lake Tanganyika and Lake Victoria, as I mentioned earlier. Fisheries co-management under the Nature Conservancy in this part of Africa on the Tanzanian side has been replicated to Zambia, and now we are looking forward to replicate this success and the package to other African lakes where there's a need to do that because it works. And then, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Lumbu. That was extremely interesting. Rosa?
Thank you very much, Peter. A really inspiring presentation. Lovely. As a first question, you were saying that the Nature Conservancy program promotes good practices and works with around 44 villages and reaches more than 160,000 people. Can you give us perhaps some more information on what these kind of practices are and what are the main problems that you face when trying to make people implement them?
Thank you very much for the question. This is an opportunity for me perhaps to explain a bit more with this very limited time. But let me start by saying the Nature Conservancy has its package on 3 pillars. Pillar number 1, which actually is aligned with your question on the practices. Pillar number 1 is to establish local institutions, build their governance capacity, and allow them to establish bylaws and manage the fisheries. So that is the technique, and in our pillar number 1, this has been very successful. And we also work in collaboration with the government, local government, such as the ministry, because it is the ministry which approves the bylaws and certify the local institutions. So our pillar number 1 on building local capacity and institutions have been very successful. And probably that is one of the practices that I would be very happy to share. Our pillar number 2 is to encourage and build the capacity of the local community to engage with researchers and the other government officials and extension service providers to protect their ecology, assess stock assessment in terms of biodiversity of their allocated areas for protection, and get data recorded. That's the electronic catch assessment survey data collection that I was talking about. This has been also very successful, where we see community protecting the fish breeding sites, doing regular patrols, collecting more than 1,000 data per year from locations to location, but engaging themselves with the researchers to ascertain whether there are progress on conservation or not. So that has been also another lesson that we usually want to share with other parts of the lake. The last part of the pillar is to encourage establishment of economic options and the financing mechanism. This goes with the individual economic development within the farm, the fishers, together with the group business enterprises, where the whole of it create very strong base of economic to reduce the fishing pressure, provide options for other income sources, but most importantly, to make people understand and respect the role of their conservation on the nature where they rely. Because the nature of conservation is you protect, you recover more. You protect, you get more. You neglect or you distract, you get less. So that's the secret. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 very specific questions. How did you start the beach management unit?
Sorry, Rosa, we're a bit out of time. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the same as before. Perhaps if you have time, perhaps a possibility could be that you answered the questions directly on the chat. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much. So now I take this opportunity to welcome our next presenter. And that will be Leonard Akwanyi from Uganda. Leonard Akwanyi from the Nile Basin Initiative Uganda will give us a case study on the Nile River with a spotlight on what the Nile River Basin Initiative is doing to aid fish migration in the Nile. He will discuss the way forward and the challenges of what need to be done to allow fish to migrate in the Nile. Please welcome Leonard. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes to start with.
Thank you so much, Peter. I will go straight to my presentation, which I've titled under Enabling Fish Migration, and of course, specifically the case of the Nile Basin. But before I start my presentation, I will wish to make a general statement that fish migration is not only a technical issue, especially when you are dealing with a transboundary and complex water system like the Nile. So it's not only a technical issue, but it's also a political issue. And therefore, you really have to deal with all these issues to ensure that we ensure fish migration and the thriving of the fish population. So a brief introduction of the Nile Basin. This is the longest river in the world with an area of 3.2 million, the length of which is 6,700 kilometers. The population for the all countries that are involved is 480 million, but within the catchment as indicated in this map, it is 250 million. Brief introduction about the Nile Basin Initiative. It was launched in 1999, and that all the countries, 10 of them, all the countries of the Nile Basin are members of the initiative, except Eritrea, which is serving as an observer within the Nile Basin. And then for purposes of management, we have the Nile equatorial area, and then the other areas as separated by those countries indicated in this slideshow. Our vision is basically to enable socioeconomic development, tapping on the Nile Basin water resources. We work on three major areas, which is facilitating cooperation, bringing these countries together to manage well the resources of the Nile. Then there's the issue of water resource management, which is purely to generate the knowledge base to inform the decisions, to inform the river basin planning and to inform development. And then of course there's the water resource development, which is the investment portfolio of the Nile Basin. If we move into the Nile Basin and its fishery resources, fisheries resources are very critical in the Nile Basin. Most of the time we tend to look at Nile Basin as for its waters or for its hydrology, but fisheries resources are also very key by the fact that the Nile Basin is rich and diverse in freshwater ecosystems. For instance, if you take Lake Victoria or other lakes and associated rivers, then this tells you the magnitude of the kind of fishery resources we're talking about here. And then of course, fishery resources are associated with numerous ecosystem goods and services, issues of nutrition, issues of livelihoods, and of course, building these national economies. For us, again, within the Nile Basin, issues of fishery resources is very key, because through that, then issues of transboundary connectivity to ensure healthy fisheries becomes very important. And then, of course, when we are very aware of these fishery ecosystems, then we stand a better chance of mainstreaming the same in the river basin planning and development at the basin level, but of course in a more practical angle at the sub-basin levels. Just to summarize the imperative of fish and fisheries in the Nile, we are talking about over 800 fish species, and this generates millions of tons of fishes from the natural catch or from the aquacultures that are in this basin. So it's a very, very critical resource within the Nile Basin that deserves concentration. If we go into the fish migration challenges and of course other challenges, then water-related infrastructure, be they dams or multipurpose projects, becomes very key. If we look at the Nile Basin, there are already existing dams or irrigation projects, but of course there's already even a lot of them planned for this same river. So this is a very big challenge. There's a lot of catchment deforestation, heavy sediments and siltation that are interfering with the breeding sites, that are making even some of these shallow water bodies like Lake Victoria becomes even more shallow. And this has a bearing on fish migration and fish health. Of course, there's habitat fragmentation and the issues of degradation, and then of course loss of these habitats. Just for instance, if we take wetlands of the Nile River, over 40% decline in the wetland extent in the Nile. And then of course the issue of pollution from agrochemicals companies, eutrophication from agriculture, and of course algal bloom, that is very evident in the Nile Basin, in the rivers and in the wetlands that forms this. Other challenges that we are dealing with also is invasive species, water hyacinth, whether you want to look at it in Lake Tana or Lake Victoria, issues of introduced fish species that have reduced the fish diversity into very few bankable fish species. And then of course issues of climate change, whether in terms of high precipitation and high temperature, all impacting on issues of fish biodiversity. And then, as I said, it's not only a technical issue, but there are also issues of conflicting governance instruments, because within this kind of transboundary context, there's need for collaboration. But if these conflicts, then fish suffer, and then of course also the migration suffers. Minimal transboundary collaborations, countries are concentrating more into working in their national territories as opposed to having those transboundary collaborations, which are very essential for fish migration. And of course, as unsustainable fishing practices, using chemicals, using wrong gears for fishing. Now, within the Nile, we are we are undertaking a lot of interventions towards ensuring fishery resources are safe. One of which is building the knowledge base during inventory of these ecosystems that are then to inform our river basin planning. We have got what we are calling the Nile Basin Sustainability Framework, which is a guideline document that informs our interventions and our work in the Nile Basin towards sustainability, the wetland management strategy, ensuring that these wetlands are conserved, the policy, environmental and social policy, ensuring that any intervention that we take are anchored on environmental sustainability principles. We also have climate change strategy, which is more into ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, which then enhance issues of freshwater ecosystems. And then, of course, we have also the Nile Basin environmental flow, which ensures that these fisheries resources are well served with water, which is part and parcel of their desired ecosystem status. And then, of course, we have Water Resources Atlas and the Wetland Atlas coming soon, mapping these wetlands so that mapping the wetlands and mapping the freshwater ecosystems.
Leonard, can you please summarize it? A few seconds remaining.
Yes, of course, in terms of what we are doing in terms of actions, we are building knowledge base, undertaking environmental studies, developing transboundary management plans to help the countries work together. And of course, we are also evaluating ecosystem services to inform, to mainstream fisheries resources into our planning. And we are engaging a lot of stakeholders, both at the government and also other stakeholders from the non-state actors. Thank you, and please, you can check on us on those sites given. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonard. It was a very interesting presentation. We have a question regarding one of the problems that you mentioned, the invasive alien species. In particular, there's a question about the water hyacinth. I understand it is a problem in the Nile Basin, and if this is the case, the question is, what are the appropriate measures to deal with this, and if these measures have been implemented?
Well, there are many interventions, not just from the Nile Basin Initiative, which are geared towards water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is a very prolific plant, and the eutrophication, siltation, all those kind of activities makes the water hyacinth very prolific. And therefore, within the Nile Basin, what we are doing, we are currently developing a water quality assessment to ensure that the water quality is at recommended level. So we are developing a baseline, developing a system into which we can use that water quality information to inform action. We have, of course, also investing through our subsidiary centers, investing in catchment management to ensure that the nutrients which feed into water hyacinth growing are checked. But more so, there are some interventions which are geared towards biological control of the weed. This has not been very successful because water hyacinth is still there in Lake Victoria, is still there in Lake Tana in Ethiopia. And yeah, so these efforts are there. We only need to amplify them so that we manage the water hyacinth in Lake Tana, in Lake Victoria, and in the entire Nile Basin.
Thank you very much. We have three more questions.
Could I please request that all the questions, the other remaining questions, go on the Q&A chat so that we can address them right from there, so that we catch up with the time. It's is 12:15, and therefore I'll request a next presentation from Sililo. Sililo Agnes Musotus is from WWF Zambia. She will focus on the connectivity of rivers for fisheries and different ecosystem services. She will use a case study on the Luangwa to explain how they are keeping it as one of the longest flowing rivers in Africa, and the work they are doing with the communities and the government. Please welcome to the presentation, Sililo Agnes Musotus. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes for the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. I'll switch off my video now because my connectivity is really poor today, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me throughout the presentation. As Peter mentioned, I hope you're able to see my screen. I'm from WWF Zambia. My name's Agnes Sililomsutu, and I manage our work in the Luangwa River Basin. And today I'll just give you an overview of our work in protecting the Luangwa as a free-flowing river. Okay, so it has 3 main sections, but I won't really dive into this because of time. I'll just go straight into the presentation and maybe talk a bit more about the work that we're doing there. So Gordon earlier shared an analysis on the free-flowing rivers work. And truly here, free-flowing rivers looks at a river stretch or the entire river system, and it's a river that is largely unaffected by human activities to its flow and connectivity. And the most important aspect why this is being done is that to ensure that we have free exchange of material and species and energy within the river systems. So just to have a quick look at what was done globally, for those of you who don't know where Luangwa is, it's in Zambia. It's in the southern part of Africa, and it's a major tributary of the Zambezi river system. And you can see here on the map, in red is highlighted the Luangwa catchment. It's one of our most pristine catchments in that 50.3% of the catchment is already protected through national parks and game management areas and also forest reserves. So the same global analysis that was done for the free-flowing rivers was also done for the Zambian scale, and highlighted there in black, circled here in black is the Luangwa River. It is the longest remaining free-flowing river that we have in Zambia. That is wholly within the boundaries of Zambia. And you can see there that there is no infrastructure that is obstructing the flow of water on the main stem itself, though we do have dams in some of the key tributaries that feed into the Luangwa system. So just to give you a bit of a picture feel of the Luangwa, that's a really, really beautiful picture of the Luangwa there. It's got high sediment load, and in the dry season, you can really see this because the water flows drastically reduce. And in the wet season, you can also see it because it's the river is quite brown, and you can see just by looking at it that it does have a high load of sediment. It also has high biodiversity in terms of wildlife, and has one of the highest concentrations of hippos and elephants in Africa, and has over 400 bird species out of the 700 bird species we have in Zambia. So it attracts quite a lot of tourism and generates about $27 million from tourism. And a lot of communities then rely directly on the system itself. We have a population of around 1.8 million people within the catchment. And the communities that live closely to the river systems depend on it for fisheries. They depend on it for their livelihood in terms of small industries looking at trade and creating crafts and the fruits in the area. And also a lot of small scale farming happens in the area, as well as commercial farming. So in 2017, there was a proposal to construct a dam along the Luangwa River main stem. This is the red block that you see here in an area called Ndevu Gorge. And the dam was being proposed by a private investor from South Africa. The idea was to generate 235 megawatts from the dam, and the cost of the dam was going to be around 6 billion US dollars. And the reservoir length was around 165 kilometers, as well as the width of the river. So the river, as well as the width of the reservoir. The dam was planned to be a multi-purpose dam, looking at fish farming, looking at irrigation for agriculture and tourism and nature conservation. So once this was proposed, we just saw it in the papers. It came as a big surprise because there was no discussion or rather no prior information of these plans being developed. And we then had the opportunity to engage with a number of stakeholders, including the government themselves, just to find out more information and to see what was being planned for the dam. So we then conducted a private assessment, looking at the information made available to us to understand what could be the potential impacts of the dam. And you can already see here the difference between the two pictures. The dam was going to flood about 6 chiefdoms that were adjacent to the river itself, at least a portion of those 6 chiefdoms, and also a portion of the adjacent hunting areas, about 80% of those, and inclusive of safari camps, 29.5% of the river being inundated within the national park. So this raised quite a lot of concern for us, having all these environmental and social impacts and economic impacts on the communities and the different stakeholders on the ground. So then we engaged on carrying out a campaign called Keep the Luangwa Flowing campaign. Because in our national law, we don't have free-flowing rivers as a definition or anything that's recognized by our laws. We then changed the narrative to speak to water resource protection areas. This is something that we have by law, and our law allows for a catchment or sub-catchment or geographic area to be protected as a water resource protection area. And there are 4 main criteria that are used for this. So we engage with the government to identify these water resource protection areas at a national scale. And the criteria that was being used is that firstly, a river system has to be important for providing water to users within a catchment or to the nation. It also has to be important in terms of sensitivity to use and in particular human impacts. And this is really focused on sedimentation and soil erosion. And also it has to have high importance in aquatic ecology, or at least the aquatic environment of the river system. And the 4th one, my personal favorite, is any other reason that the minister deems as important for it to be declared as a water resource protection area. So we use these 4 criteria, and by mainly looking at the 3 criteria that are able to be measured and for us to identify the potential water resource protection areas. And with this criteria, Luangwa did come up as a very key area for protection in terms of sensitivity to human use and high aquatic importance. So we then launched the campaign, and I'll run you through what we did in the period that we had the campaign running. one of the key things that we really worked on is ensuring that we have a team, both internally and externally, that was looking to drive this campaign forward.
Agnes, sorry, you still have only 1 minute. Could you please start?
Oh, sure. Okay, all right. And the campaign was being done through a media and community engagement. So we had drama shows with the community where we highlighted the potential impact of the dam, as well as the negative and the positive impacts of having a dam built in their area. We also had a petition being run on social media as well as on hard copy, and we had 197,000 signatures on that petition. We also used a lot of the evidence and the research that we had to have one-on-one meetings with our government to really lobby them to have the Luangwa protected. And the campaign started in July 2018 and ended in 2019 March. And in April 2019, our government then halted the plans to develop the dam on the Luangwa River system. So just to quickly let you know what we're doing now is that we are working with communities through CSOs and community radio stations to raise awareness on protecting their catchment and sustainable development in terms of deforestation and agricultural practices. We're also mapping out in detail what protection would look like for the different systems that we have at national scale. So for Luangwa, for the Upper Zambezi, and also for the Middle Zambezi. And we are also working with the government to plan on creating a national hydropower plan that can help us identify better potential sites for hydropower development. We're also looking at investing in renewable energy resources with our government, and we're supporting the development of a strategic environmental assessment for renewable energy and energy efficiency plans. I think I'll end here because I have 1 minute. The next slide was really to just run through some of the key lessons around the campaign. And in summary, I can say that teamwork is really important to get things done. Involving different types of stakeholders is also important. And research is important, yes, but really socializing that science and getting buy-in from the stakeholders is just as important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnes.
Thank you very much, Agnes.
That is our Q&A session, please.
We have a question related, in fact, to your last slide, I guess, to the lessons learned. When the communities learned about this dam, this new dam being built, I understand there was a big social conflict because it could bring good impacts, such as irrigation that you mentioned, but also, of course, many impacts. So the question, how can we balance construction of hydropower, of hydroelectric power that has an economic importance and its effect on fish species and biodiversity in general?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. Creating a balance is a very difficult thing to answer. There's no generic answer or one size fits all kind of answer. I think what is really important is to understand the different trade-offs involved. In our case, a dam being built in a river that was high in sediment load was also not practical in terms of maintenance for the dam. So it then raised a lot of questions as to why it was being done in the manner in which it was being done, and that made it easier to then campaign and create evidence on why it should be done better. But I think in general, the key is to understand both the negative and the positive impacts of the different plans being built and understand where trade-offs are needed. So in our case, a trade-off would be looking at the national scale and identifying other potential sites that could be better used for hydropower development. And that's a conversation we've had with our government, and we've also gotten a lot of good buy-in from our government to actually work on that, because currently the whole country is dotted for potential sites, and there is no way of taking different investors to very selected sites after a bit of research has already been done. I hope that answers your question.
I don't know if we have time for another one. Peter?
No, we will
Okay.
appreciate to get some Q&A, to get some more questions on the Q&A platform. But in the meantime, I would prefer to invite our next presenter. And as highlighted by Kerry, Felipe Laleye want to be available. So I think this is an opportunity for our new presenter to.
Hi, Peter. My name is Ruth. My name is Ruth Cabera. You probably do not have the information yet because this is a last minute thing that came up. So Felipe could not make it, unfortunately. So I had to pitch in for him. I'm happy to do this presentation.
Ruth, could you share your video so we can see you?
Yes, Kerry. I wish I could. Well, let me just do it very shortly because my Wi-Fi is very unstable. So I'm really afraid that it may go off. Everything may go off like it has several times during the presentations. So I'm just going to share it very shortly, please, so that you see my face, then I go off immediately. Is that okay? Okay. So let me share my screen right now. I'm going to try to do this. I hope I get it right.
It's the bottom green button. It says share screen.
Yes, yeah, I am there. So I want to open the.
Once you're on the screen,
Can everybody see me?
Once you're on the screen, you can look at the small button on your right. That is usually for the PowerPoint presentation, the large screen.
So I am on the sharing screen. Can you guys see some form of screen here?
No,
yeah, so where do I go exactly? Because I'm trying to go to my desktop. You do not see anything. Yes? Peter?
Ruthie?
Hello?
Yes. You click once on the share screen, then you get another question that allows you to share it. If you do that, we'll see your screen.
Okay. Yes. Are you able to right now?
Yes. So now what you do, go down all the way.
Are you able to? Okay.
Yes. Yes. Go down all the way to the share screen. The small bullet. Yes. There.
To slideshow?
Yes. Slideshow. Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much. You're a great teacher. I'm a bit new to this stuff, so thank you. My name is Ruth Cabera. I do environmental science and education. I also work with Wild Fish Migration Foundation, so it's a privilege to be here today. Great presentations, and most of you have said a lot of what I would have said, especially Gerald. So thank you. Gordon, so thank you so much. So I'm going to take a very short time to speak about Eastern African Swimways Initiative. So this is an initiative that we thought of around last year, and we felt it was important for people to come together and talk about fish and rivers, especially around Eastern Africa. Very little is said, especially when it comes to dam management in Eastern Africa. Very little is talked about. There are very few policies, if any, and the implementation is also very low. So we felt, why not begin speaking around this theme so that we are able to gather attention from others, because of course, when you are many people talking about the same thing, then you get better attention than when you're a few people talking about the same thing. So we felt that we needed to inspire organizations, to inspire institutions, to inspire individuals, and several other people to talk about the swimways in Eastern Africa and the rivers, most importantly, that harbor the fish. So Africa's population is big, and most of these people depend on fish and rivers, just like Gordon had talked about in very a lot, had talked about it a lot. A lot of people depend on fish and rivers. So it is important that this is talked about, that something is done about this, and we're able to move forward together. So this initiative is in collaboration with Reaching Rivers, Wild Fish Migration Foundation, WWF, BOKU, and the OAK consultants. So we are doing this together closely. We're working very closely with Kerry Brink from Reaching Rivers. So let me begin on my very short presentation. So we're going to look at why is this important, why are we doing this, and how will we do this. So Eastern African rivers are beautiful. That is just one of the pictures that you can see on your screen currently of the Nile River, and I'm very grateful that there's somebody from the Nile Basin Initiative, right? So our rivers are beautiful, and they harbor so much biodiversity, which I'm very passionate about rivers, and that is why I feel it is so important for us to work on saving our rivers. They are threatened from so many causes, from so many effects, just like the doctor from the Nile Basin Initiative has talked about, and there's so much we can do together to save these rivers. So that's a beautiful picture of the Nile Basin, of the Nile River, I mean, which is a transboundary river that traverses about 11 countries. Can you imagine that? And the longest river in the world. So these are the kinds of rivers that we need to save all rivers, but I'm saying that such rivers are extremely important for our own survival and for the survival of other biodiversity. So we have 68 migratory fish species in Kenya currently, and I'm very happy that Gordon is here with us today, because he is also working on establishing the eels in the coast of Kenya. With Dr. Mbaru, he wished really he would be here, but it was unfortunate that he couldn't make it. So it's really great that we have Gordon, and maybe he will talk one or two, three things about the eels in the coast of Kenya. So there are so many large dams that are planned in Eastern Africa. If you look at the picture currently on your screen, we have the blue dots, which represent the dams that are under construction, and the red ones, which represents the dams that are planned. Now, this is the Eastern African regions. And one may argue that, the dams are not that much, compared to the Asian part, the European part, and the South American part. But, that is where we are heading to if nothing is done, right? That is where everybody started from. They started with a few dams that were constructed, that became barriers on rivers and could not allow fish migration. And now we are all having trouble getting rid of these dams. So I believe that the sooner we start working on preventing the construction of these dams to allow fish migration, then the better for everybody, and especially for our rivers. So what do we want to do with the Eastern African Initiative, Swimways Initiative? So first, we want to raise awareness of the social and ecological benefits of free-flowing rivers and healthy fish populations. Well, very few people understand the deep importance of rivers. And what the ecological benefits that we get from them. Very few understand, and this knowledge hasn't transversed so many areas. So raising awareness and educating people is really fundamental, I believe. And this is one of our core objectives in this initiative, and we hope to achieve that. Also improving knowledge and understanding of migratory fishes and free-flowing rivers. Well, knowledge can only be understood if you raise awareness. So I think it is important that we improve the knowledge by sharing information. How is Europe able to remove the dams that they are removing currently? Sharing that knowledge will then improve the understanding of people about the migratory fishes and free-flowing rivers, integrate all systems together to be able to save our rivers. Then we hope to influence policy and decision makers on the topic of fish passage and river connectivity. It's very important because policies are there. In so many sectors have policies, not only environmental, but so many other sectors have policies. But then the implementation is always a problem. So if we can influence the policies, if we can influence the implementation, then I believe we can be able to go a long way. Then promote research, conservation and restoration in river connectivity and fish passage, conservation and restoration. So it is important that several entities are able to expound their research on this, on swimways, so that we improve our rivers generally.
Ruth, you have only 30 seconds, please. Can you wind up, please?
Yes. Hello?
30 minutes
okay.
To wind up.
Thank you, Peter. I'll try, yes. Thank you, Peter. So how do we plan to do this? We plan to start a movement of people and organizations who share knowledge on river connectivity and
Oh, I think that
I'm very sorry, like, Carrie?
Yes,
Yes,
you
I'm back.
Dropped off.
Yes, sorry. Like I said, my internet is extremely unstable. So let me just finish this so that it doesn't happen again. So how do we plan to do this? Well, but due to the coronavirus, we postponed it to September. So the date will be communicated, but seminar is one of the ways that we want to create this knowledge. We want to invite professionals to share stories and exchange ideas and inspire each other so that we're able to move towards this. I want to minimize this. Okay. So another way is to develop an East African network on river connectivity. I don't know, my screen is...
Yeah, we can't see your share screen, but it's okay if you just finish up with the last 2 points that you had.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm trying to go to the next screen, but I'm unable to.
Shall I share my screen?
Sorry, guys. Yes, please, Carrie, yes. That would be of great help.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it is seen.
Yes.
Okay. So
yes, I can. So can we go to the second last slide, please?
This one, Ruth?
This just after that slide. The next, Carrie, please.
Then that's all of the slides. That's all we have, Ruth.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, that's it. So another way is to develop a swimway poster for East Africa and to stimulate public awareness events in all East African countries under the umbrella of World Fish Migration Day. So public awareness will of course provide a platform to share the knowledge and to inspire others to do better when it comes to river connectivity. So yes, so thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I'm very sorry for my internet connection and everything that has gone wrong. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we only have 1 minute for Q&A, and the rest I would advise that we have questions typed on our Q&A chat.
Hi, Ruth. Fantastic presentation.
Hi.
Let's see, we have a very interesting question here. It says, I see that the river connectivity of African rivers looks quite better than the connectivity in the rivers in many other places. Do you think that the mistakes made in other countries in terms of these connectivity problems could help to prevent them in Africa?
Yes, thank you, Rosa. Wonderful question. I definitely think so. Well, let me just minimize this. I have so much problem with my internet and yeah. So yeah, I think so.
We cannot see you, but we
Sorry?
listen to you very well, so it's fine, Ruth.
Yes, so Rosa, could you please repeat the question kindly?
Yes, the question is basically if you think that that Africa can learn from the bad measures and the problems that we have faced in the rest of the countries. It says
Yes, most definitely. Like I stated, our rivers are not as fragmented as the ones in South America or in Europe. But I believe we can learn a lot because there are European rivers and also South American rivers. I once like that some few years ago, like 50 or 60 years ago. But currently you can see the state of rivers, the pressure they have and the effort they're trying to put in to get rid of these dams because, for example, the salmon fish is endangered and a huge population of people depend on it. So if we aren't able to take charge and ensure that the same does not happen in Kenya beforehand, then in Africa and in Kenya, because I'm a Kenyan, then we are going to be in the same state that European rivers are in and South American rivers are in. So I think we can learn a lot, and that is why knowledge sharing is so important. That's why these platforms are there to ensure that people exchange ideas on how then can we do better? What can we implement that others did not implement? ETC.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ruth. And I know this is an interesting topic. Please get our questions chat on the chat, and then Ruth may be responding accordingly. In meantime, let me take this opportunity now to welcome Jeremy Shelton from Freshwater Research Center. Dr. Shelton is from the Freshwater Research Center, and will be telling us about the creative approach to conservation of migratory sandfish and its habitats by bringing a community of landowners together to rescue the young fish. Please welcome Dr. Shelton.
Cool, thanks very much. And thanks to everybody at the World Fish Migration Foundation and all your collaborators for organizing this ambitious and awesome event. Yeah, I've really enjoyed hearing all the different perspectives from around Africa and the world. Yeah, so honored to be a part of it. I'm going to be telling you guys today about a project called Saving Sandfish, and we're on a mission to rescue one of South Africa's most threatened freshwater fish. So we're bringing it back down to the bottom of Africa. So to begin, let me take you out to the remote and ancient Durang River Valley. It's an extremely dry and quiet place, especially during summer. And that photograph was taken where the green box is shown. So we're really on a river system that drains out onto the west coast of South Africa. And in winter, rivers in this area flow really strongly, but then in summer, they shrink back a lot. And it's almost as if the landscapes and their riverscapes kind of pulse, and they seem to breathe with the seasons here. And that has major implications for the wildlife in the area, and especially for the aquatic wildlife. You can see that stark seasonal change there. There's one species of fish whose life cycle is closely tied to this pulsing and breathing of nature, and that's the Clanwilliam sandfish. It's one of our larger freshwater fish species in this part of the world. And it's one of the few fish that undertakes big migrations. And if you look at them up close, they've got this interesting shaped mouth, which in Afrikaans, the language of the local farmers, is called an onderbek, or an undermouth, and that's an adaptation for grazing algae on the stream bed. And just like the rivers, the fish in this part of the world are are ancient, obviously not the individuals, but the lineages of the fish. And anthropologists have found paintings of mouths of fish with these onderbek under mouths on the walls of caves where the sand people would have lived thousands of years ago. And they generally painted their caves with symbols of things that were important to them, whether that's physically or nutritionally or spiritually. And I believe that those people would have definitely taken advantage of this predictable arrival of these migrating sandfish, which would migrate from bigger main stem rivers like the Durang River into smaller tributaries like the Bido River to spawn in probably quite shallow water. And our conversations with people in the valley who have lived in these areas for their whole lives have told us about a time when the sandfish migrations were so abundant. There were so many fish that it almost looked like the fish were walking on water. And they've told us about how people working on the farms in the area could just go and collect them when they were spawning because they were so vulnerable, and they'd take them out of the river and make them into fish cakes. But today, those fish are not seen anymore, and the people in the valley suspect they may have disappeared. This is a story that repeats itself across South Africa, but throughout the world as well. We see, if we look at WWF's Living Planet Index, a decline in vertebrate populations in freshwater that's almost twice as rapid as that in marine and freshwater ecosystems. And marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And in South Africa, our national biodiversity assessment that we undertake every 5 years has shown us that freshwater fishes have become the most threatened species group, with a very high proportion of endemic species under threat, importantly. So bringing it back to the sandfish, there was probably a time when they were widespread throughout this Olifants-Durang River network on the west coast of South Africa. But in recent times, we've seen a real big range contraction. And today, they seem to be only able to spawn in a relatively small number of tributaries. And one of those is the Bido River, and we're going to have a more detailed look at that one now. So there was a time when the Durang River was, where sandfish populations in the Durang River were healthy, fish of all different sizes, young fish, old fish, indicating a healthy population. And winter, this is a winter rainfall area. So after the winter rains arrive, the tributaries start flowing strongly, and that would trigger a migration of sandfish from the Durang River main stem up smaller tributaries like the Bido, up probably about 10 kilometers, maybe 20 kilometers up to find their spawning sites. This is in springtime. And they would then spawn and lay lots of eggs, and those eggs would hatch into small sandfish after a week or two. And those little fish would use these tributaries to feed and to grow, these relatively safe tributary environments, and would slowly make their way back down towards the Durang River, probably over 6 months, over summer, and then join the big main stem population, injecting a fresh wave of young fish into that population. But in recent times, that life cycle has been severed, and the fish are not making it back to the Durang. One of the main reasons is that the river is drying up very quickly, much quicker in summer now than it did in the past. And so these little sandfish seem to get trapped in these really shallow sedimented pools that get really warm. And to make matters worse, they're not in there alone. They're getting trapped with predatory fish like bluegills and bass that we've introduced from North America. Who would have thought that a 13-centimeter bluegill was capable of swallowing a 5-centimeter young sandfish? So what we've seen really is a wide-scale recruitment failure of the sandfish in tributaries like the Bido. And then coming back to the Durang main stem, we're seeing an aging population now of adult fish with no young fish coming in from the next generation. And we're seeing an overall decline in sandfish as well. in 2013, we only found 50 adult fish in about 100 kilometers of river. So it's a recipe for extinction. And so our plan is with this project is quite simple, really. With the Saving Sandfish project, it's to rescue young fish from the river before they run out of water and before they get eaten, and to move them to safer habitats upstream. So we look for the fish. When we find them, we try to catch them. We admire them, take lots of time to do that. And then we move them in buckets, in cars, up to safer areas in the catchment, and then we release them. Last summer, we took them up 20 kilometers to a stretch of river that's got water all year and no invasive fish, and so a safer environment. But that's only 900 meters and so of river. So they're really running out of space in the wild. So this is where things get interesting. Having lost most of their safe habitat in the wild, we've had to come up with a new plan. And so we've started talking to landowners in the area. Usually that starts over a bottle of beautiful Cedarburg wine from that area. And what we found out quite quickly is a lot of the people in this area didn't even know about some of the freshwater species in their rivers flowing past their farms, like the sandfish. So a big part of our project is a visual storytelling component. So our project's a hybrid, I guess, between classical conservation and visual storytelling, where we're using different approaches like virtual reality to target different target audiences. We're using VR to connect with landowners. We're developing a web series to share the story with the general public, and a documentary film to share the story more widely. And since we've started engaging more with landowners in this way, we've seen some really cool ideas coming forward, and some landowners actually offering their farm dams as sandfish sanctuaries within these catchments. And in some cases, landowners even getting involved in data capture, which is amazing to see. So this project, to sum up, is really an attempt to bridge this broken life cycle of the sandfish by creating sanctuaries for sandfish to grow to a size where they can one day be released back to the Durang River by landowners.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Okay.
Please, can you spend at least 20 seconds to wind up?
Sure thing. Sure thing. So 2 take-home messages from our project so far. If anybody's trying similar projects elsewhere, we've learned that it's important to invest time in understanding not only the biology of the species that you're trying to conserve, but of the people in the area as well, and also the power of pairing up science with storytelling. And to follow the journey, you can check out our website for the storytelling side of the project, fishwaterfilms.com, and we have our web series launching on the 20th of May. And lastly, just a big thank you to the funders and partners on the project so far.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shelton. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
We're only left with only 2 minutes. Q&A, please take one question so that
we have many questions, but let's choose the most perhaps direct one. What do you think? Which do you think is the most challenge for sunfish in South Africa?
I think it's probably running out of water, which is one of the biggest challenges for fish throughout South Africa and throughout dry regions in the world. Like a colleague of mine always tells me, well, there's nothing to conserve if there's no water for it to live in. So yeah, I think disappearing habitat's a big one, and there's a few different reasons behind that, depending on where you are and which fish you're working on, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few more questions regarding invasive alien species, but I guess perhaps you have the chance to answer them directly in the question chat. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Now let me take this opportunity to welcome Louis Stafford from TNC South Africa, who is going to share with us how TNC water funds activities can improve freshwater fish habitat and share examples of a few examples of freshwater fisheries programs in Africa. Louis, please welcome. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes presentation time.
Thank you, Peter. Really excited to be part of this webinar, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of our experiences here on how water funds can benefit freshwater fish conservation. So I work for the Nature Conservancy's Africa program. I'm based in South Africa, where I support the development of water funds. So I'm going to refer a bit about water funds and the benefits to freshwater fisheries. And I'm also going to attempt to cover some of our work in Gabon. And I'm a bit of like a fish out of water on this webinar, since fisheries, I'm not fisheries, it's not my background. But there's a big backup team here in the form of Jeremy and Limbo and others who can help me out with difficult questions. Also want to just acknowledge my colleagues who have contributed to this presentation. When areas run out of water, the historical response is engineered solutions, desalination, groundwater exploration, or building more dams. But what if there is another solution, something that's cost effective and has long-term sustainable impacts? I'm going to refer to the Greater Cape Town Water Fund as such a solution, nature-based solutions. Cape Town, the Greater Cape Town region is running out of water, and while we faced almost a situation where the city of Cape Town had to queue for days on, people in the city had to queue for days on end for their daily water supply, we're still losing 55 billion liters of water every year as a result of catchment degradation. And if nothing is done, the water losses will double within 20 years. Now, to put the current water losses in context, it's about 2 months water supply for Cape Town. And for a city that almost run out of water, this is quite a big deal. The studies that we've done for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund business case has not only shown that nature-based solutions is the most cost-effective solution to the water crisis, but it's the most sustainable and the most cost-effective, and it has other benefits. Now, in addition to the water benefits, nature-based solutions also protect biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity. It can create green jobs, reduce the fire intensity of runaway wildfires. For example, many of our watersheds are invaded by pine, and pine burns up to 10 times hotter than the native vegetation. It destroys seed banks and has a long-term negative impact on terrestrial biodiversity. But it also benefits freshwater fish habitat. South Africa has about 118 freshwater fish species, and Jeremy just shared the high levels of threat and endemicity. And especially here in the Cape Fold Mountains, where the Cape Town Water Fund has its footprint, 2/3 of the endemic fish that are threatened in South Africa occur in the Cape Fold Mountain ecoregion. Many of these, there are 42 taxa, of which 80% are endemic just to this region, 60% are threatened, and we also have some localized extinctions. And they're threatened, and this has come out through Jeremy's and other presentations. Climate change has an impact. Invasive plants that invade their habitat, and invasive fish species, over-abstraction of rivers, and generally just habitat destruction. So how can the water fund activities help to the conservation of these freshwater communities. Invasive trees use more water, so they reduce the flow and it increases sediment. And this has a negative impact on indigenous fish, especially those that need faster flowing streams. By removing the invasive trees and restoring wetlands, the situation can be turned around and the habitat can be improved. It's also important to raise awareness about the conservation, about the importance of fish, because fish is underwater. People don't see it. We like the big five because we can see it. But when it comes to our aquatic species, they're not that obvious unless you look carefully. So starting with school programs and just making communities aware of the importance of protecting these fish. So I'm now going to jump to Gabon, where we are working, the Nature Conservancy is working with the government and NGOs to improve fisheries management to address the impacts such as overfishing and hydroelectricity. Gabon is really a conservationist dream. It's very high in biodiversity. 88% of the country has forestry cover, 96% free-flowing rivers, and there's one river every 600 meters. So this very special area is under threat from expanding development. And this picture just shows some of the over 400 fish species that were collected in one of the local lakes. The situation is changing at a rapid rate. The economy of Gabon is dependent on resource abstraction such as oil and manganese, like it's shown in this picture. And this all impact on fish habitat and threaten the future of the unique fish in that region. So the Nature Conservancy started working with a local NGO, ULO, in 2013 to develop a fisheries management plan. And the fisheries management plan depends on citizen science, and it's a bottom-up approach where we are looking at improving gear and outlawing incorrect fishing gear, designing allocating areas for no-take zones. And we collected baseline, and now we have sufficient baseline to help inform a monitoring evaluation system to measure the impact of these actions on the fishery protection. The result of these, the management plan and its implementation now has more large fish returning to the lakes, and we want to replicate these benefits in other areas. There's many others that refer to hydroelectricity, so it's very important to ensure that the dams, to have the dam location in the right places to avoid or to reduce the impact, specifically on the migration of fish. So we're working with the government of Gabon to and there's basically three goals. The one is to advise smart siting of future hydroelectricity projects and to optimize the economic and environmental values, to give guidance and best practice to protect and reduce the impacts on biodiversity, and to assess the offset compensation for mechanisms for conservation finance through Gabon's new Sustainable Development Law. This work that was piloted in Northwest Gabon, and the successes and the lessons that we learned there in that area that supply the hydropower to Libreville. We now have an aim of taking the lessons there and deploy it nationwide, and to help protect biodiversity and priority species and critical habitat. And there's three criteria. The one is looking at protection of endangered species, range restricted species, and migratory species. Monitoring impact is not something that we really made enough use of in many of our activities. So it's important to design monitoring evaluation programs to not only look at the progress of programs, but also to look at their impacts. And by understanding the impacts of our programs, we can adapt our management to improve and to avoid those things that went wrong. And it's also important to share those lessons across different geographies, different countries, and to help us not to make the same mistakes twice. So thank you very much for this opportunity. For more information, you can visit our website at where we work in Africa, and we're happy to take questions, and I'm certainly going to defer some of the questions that I can't answer to my colleagues here on the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise, for a great presentation. Now it is time for our Q&A. We have 4 minutes to answer questions, please. Q&A.
Thank you very much, Louis, for your presentation. So you have highlighted the need of monitoring the impact that your actions have, correct? But I would like to know if, under your experience, do you think that after all the work that you are doing with communities to increase awareness, do you think that social perception is changing?
I think it's changing, but it's very localized. So it's important to, but use those localized changes to tell the story. It's easier for, what we find is we in the conservation field and we understand the problem. So if we share the message, it's from the conservation field to the larger population. But if we can get people to start sharing the stories, giving those communities the voice to talk to their peers and to their neighboring communities, I think there will be much more efficient communication rather than just coming from the conservation world. So there is localized changes, and if we can scale those changes, it can go a long way.
Thank you very much. Do we have time, sorry, for another question?
Yes, we
Peter?
still have
Yes.
2 minutes. You can ask another question, please.
We just have another question. What are the opportunities for greater catchment scale collaboration? And are there existing Pan-African agencies or commissions who could play a bigger role?
Yeah, there's certainly opportunities for scaling the work to, because we have to scale work to larger watersheds and catchments to really have an impact. And one of the, and I think this COVID situation and some of the lessons that we've learned through the waterfront collaborations is certainly that unless NGOs, governments, and conservation agencies start working together and aligning programs with the diminishing resources for conservation, we are going to not be, we will tread water. We won't be able to turn the tide. And it's also important to rather focus on where the opportunities are to make a difference than to spread ourselves too thinly. So good management plans, focal areas, making the case, understanding what we're trying to impact is all important. And then there's opportunities to access funding at larger levels. But many of the grant funding and aid funding has a lifespan. So what we really need to try and do and find the traction is for local communities to take ownership and to still get some benefits out of their resources. And by realizing the benefit and the value of resources, they will protect it because it's just for their own future.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis. Let me just
Thank
take
you.
this opportunity now to welcome Dr. Gordon O'Brien to summarize the key points that are raised from this session, from our presentation. Dr. O'Brien, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I think, can you just allow me to show my video again?
Yes, please.
And then I just want to put this image of the free-flowing rivers on again. So I think we've had a wonderful opportunity to talk about Africa and to look at where we stand in Africa. And I think what's been very exciting is that we have had so many representatives from different parts of the continent talking about their experiences with river management and fish migrations. And I hope that you can appreciate, as I do, how we all tend to focus back on sustainable water resource management. And I think it's important to raise how important it is for us to present fisheries, fish conservation, fish migrations, sustainable fisheries, livelihoods as a package, because it makes sense to us. It makes sense that to understand that healthy ecosystems, healthy fish ensures that the Africans themselves, ourselves, remain in a healthy state. And that is very exciting to see. And I'd like to encourage everybody to continue to do that. I think there have been many indications of problems that we're dealing with across the continent. And I think that, I'd like to just raise a few ideas, place a few seeds for thought pertaining to things like, our estuaries, connectivity between estuaries and rivers, where the dams are going in. And the fact that, I'm sorry, Ruth, that I know that you feel that you want to halt dam development, but it's a necessary evil, so to speak, that we need to look after people. But importantly, if we explain to people that they are dependent on these resources and the well-being of those resources, and healthy resources result in healthy people, we can all find that balance somewhere between using our resources and protecting our resources so that we can maintain these populations. I think what we need to do going forward, based on what we've presented, guys, is that we need to showcase our spectacular fish fauna better. We need to really put Africa on the map, the global map, by attracting people to look after, think about, care about, and use our African species in a sustainable manner. And that is definitely something that I would like to encourage. We haven't mentioned much of, and we had the unfortunate Emmanuel Mbaro, one of our collaborators, was not able to present his work on the Anguillid project that we're doing on the east coast of Africa. But, we do have these catadromous migratory species. We do have potidromous species. We have species that have got migrations or migratory requirements on many different scales. We have incredible floodplains and floodplain river connections that we need to understand. And, just finally, before we close up, to highlight the opportunities we have in Africa to not only address development issues and new dams and new pollution events and new alien species problems. We need to find a way of characterizing what we have, what we still have. We need to find a way of identifying important populations of migratory species and connected river reaches, and showing them off and preserving them and protecting them, and trying to then divert these developments away from these vulnerable areas. And I think that's something that we really need to think of as on a continental scale. And we need your help. We need the rest of the world to help us, to continue to help us to learn from not just mistakes, but experiences that you've all had. And again, Louise, you highlighted the importance of the communities themselves, Africans ourselves, that we must learn to value our resources and to understand that in order to, not only should we, you know, that they're not just there for us to develop and live off, that we need to protect them and put back into our resources, and understand that protecting them protects us in the long run again. So I think that those are very valuable take-home messages. It's been so wonderful to have, I think this is the first time ever that we have been able to talk about fish migrations across the continent, having representatives from the whole continent talking about this together. And it's an exciting first step, I think, in starting new relationships, giving us opportunities to look at problems. I have to go to the Luangwa. You know, I grew up in the Zambezi catchment on the other side of the catchment in Zimbabwe, and it just makes me so excited to know that there are these ecosystems out there and opportunities to still go and experience this wonderful part of this wonderful continent that we live in. And just thank you, everybody. Thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for the interest that you have. When you get those tough periods when nobody seems to appreciate what you're doing, and you seem to be fighting with everybody across the continent, you know, developers and regulators, you seem to be the only voice. Take courage, please, and continue to speak for the fish, because they have a beautiful place to live, and we want to look after it as much as is possible. And importantly, again, those vulnerable African communities, those people out there who depend on these resources, who don't easily have a voice, we need to become that voice for them and to start to look after them as well. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity to have a dedicated African session. I hope that everybody has learned something from these presentations. I hope that it stimulated your interest to contact us and to think about us and to use us. If we have some experiences that you could benefit from, we'd be willing and love to share that with you. And you need to come and bury your feet in our African soil. So you need to actually come and experience what's going on our continent. That's when all this COVID-19 issues pass, I suppose. Thank you again, Kerry, and the World Fish Migration Foundation for your support in the session. And we really have benefited tremendously. We hope that this stimulates more discussion and more opportunities for us to not only work together, but to do more work. So we thank you so much for that opportunity. That's it for me. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. O'Brien, for this winding up very strong and powerful message. That actually were summarizing the cries and calls for all members who participate in this discussion. As you highlighted, this is the beginning of a wonderful work, perhaps that is just ahead of us. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone. But now I wanted to bring Ajan to provide and to say a few words in final as we end the session. Ajan,
yeah.
please.
Yes, of course, by starting by thanking you as well, Peter. This is really, really well done. Your time management is quite amazing. Very good. Thank you. And Kerry too. And all the speakers, of course. You have done a really good job to put African migratory fish on the agenda, I think. So now I will close this session. First of all, of course, thanking also our sponsors who made this possible and who are also making World Fish Migration Days possible. I wish I could mention them all, but that would take too long, but it's really fantastic that they support us on this and we can do this. Maybe a little bit opportunistic, but maybe I can also thank us all on behalf of the migratory fish, because that's what we're doing this all for. And I would like to end with a song. In Europe, we have the Eurovision Song Festival, and this year it won't happen because of the COVID situation. Therefore, we came up with a Eurovision song contest, and several people have sung really nice songs about fish. send it to us. We've put it on a website, and in 2 days, on Saturday, you can start voting what is the one that you like most. So what I would like to do now is to close the session with one song, which is one which I particularly like myself, to be honest. I'm not allowed to say that, but I do, because this is such a nice song. You will, I'm sure, hear it yourself. Sorry, I'm going to do this again to make sure that we have the right sound. And there we go. So it is really lovely. I wish you a lot of pleasure with this song, and see you at the next session, which is the European session. Isn't that really impressive? So beautiful, so nice. So, see you later at the session of Europe.
Thanks so much, Arjan. I wanted just to ask all the presenters and everybody involved to share their screen so I could take a print screen of everybody, of all the presenters. Is that possible?
It says that you cannot share the video because the host has stopped it.
Stopped
it.
That's you, Carrie.
Yeah, I stopped it. Oh, interesting.
Stopped it.
Yeah. Is it now?
Your video, no, still not possible. Oh, here I am.
Yeah.
I see. Oh,
Yeah.
for some reason I appeared.
Okay, this is who we have. I'm going to print screen now. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
I think it was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.